God will take care of you. I don't know about you, but because of our current study, I'm learning some new ways in which God does that. Well, not new to him, but new to my understanding. And this kind of takes a whole new perspective. As you know, we've been studying Seeing the Unseen. We're going to keep doing this for a couple more weeks, and then we'll finally wrap it up. I just want to keep this in front of us. This is about spiritual vision, developing spiritual vision in our lives. And the simple formula is Bible knowledge and discernment, being able to take Bible knowledge, what we know as the truths in God's teaching, and applying them properly in our lives. And that will give us the ability, as Joe says, to see the unseen. And a foundational passage to this study, I keep this in front of us as well, from Ephesians 6:12. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, and against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Now, this passage takes on a little more meaning to me as our study has continued here, and from our text today for today's lesson. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood. But the reality is, that's exactly what we do. That's exactly the problem. We've gotten caught up in a fight with flesh and blood. And often that flesh and blood is each other. And in today's lesson, we're going to learn that that's the wrong fight. And that's one of, I think, Satan's greatest weapons that he uses against us, is getting us in that position where we think we got it all figured out. And if it takes raising my voice for you to hear it and understand that I got it and you don't, then so be it. And that's a battle of flesh and blood, and it's the wrong battle. So our text for today's lesson comes from 2 Corinthians 10, verses 1 through 7. And several of you are familiar with this already, especially if you're reading the book right now. But again, I want to make the comment that how many times have I read this passage? I don't know if I've ever actually preached this text. I may have. There's a particular verse in the passage that I'll point out that I'm very mindful of. It's often a verse I think about in times when I might be struggling about going in the right direction. But the point that I want to make, and in your Bibles, this text is probably highlighted with a title, Spiritual Warfare or Spiritual Fighting, something like that. And I got to be honest, I never really saw this as one of those spiritual warfare passages until now. And I hope I can share a greater understanding with this text with you this morning. But let's get to it. Let's read it. I, Paul, myself, entreat you by the meekness and gentleness of Christ. I who am humble when face to face with you, but bold toward you when I am away. I beg of you that when I am present, I may not have to show my boldness with such confidence as I count on showing against some who suspect us of walking according to the flesh. For though we walk in the flesh, we are not waging war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but have divine power to destroy strongholds. We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God, and take every thought captive to obey Christ. And that's the text that really stands out to me here. And to take every thought captive. And there's the key in this text. So if you're getting ready to check out, take a nap, get on your phone, not pay attention, grab that one, okay? You'll have the lesson. Or just fight the fight and stay engaged with me. But that really is the key in this passage, taking every thought captive to obey Christ. Verse 6, being ready to punish every disobedience when your obedience is complete. Look at what is before your eyes. If anyone is confident that he is Christ, let him remind himself that just as he is in Christ, so also are we. So a little bit of background to kind of understand the context that Paul is writing this particular part of the message, the letter to the Corinthians. We all know the history of the Corinthian church is a congregation, groups of people that struggled with some things and had a history of fighting amongst themselves and quite being very judgmental. So Paul is dealing with a church that is buying into superficial judgments, questioning his legitimacy, and is being influenced by self-promoting teachers. If you continue to read on after this text here, the beginning of chapter 10 in 2 Corinthians, you'll see more and more talk about these people who are rising up and declaring that, hey, we're the ones that got it figured out. We're the ones that got it. Not this two-faced Paul, you know. They were looking at Paul and thinking, you know, you're kind of weak, Paul. You're kind of weak. And we just don't think you come with the authority of God that you claim. So this is what Paul is addressing overall in this context. The bottom line is the Corinthians are fighting the wrong fight. They're fighting amongst themselves. They're attacking Paul. They've been misguided and misdirected quite effectively by Satan himself, however he's decided to do this. And I want us to think about this too. And we hinted at it in our class. Well, we didn't hint at it. We were very open about it in our class. How many times do we, just like the Corinthians, get caught up in fighting with each other? And that's the problem that Paul is addressing here. And the bottom line is it's the wrong fight. And if I'm fighting the wrong fight, how well am I going to do in the right fight? Well, the problem is I'm not going to do very well because I'm not even there. I'm not even in the right fight. There's no way to have any success or to overcome that when we're fighting the wrong fight. In many cases, so are we. And I guess I've just already made this point. We too often fight with each other, and in so doing, we serve our enemy very, very well. Very, very well. I got to set the stage here. There's a kind of battle most people don't see. When we take the time to notice it, it's very obvious, but often it goes unnoticed in our lives. It doesn't make big headlines. It doesn't leave visible scars, although it can at times, but often it doesn't. And yet it shapes everything. Our peace, our purpose, our relationships, and our faith. This is huge. The Apostle Paul, writing in 2 Corinthians chapter 10 here, pulls back the curtain and shows us that the real battlefield is not out here. It's not even out there. It's right here. We've been talking about this the whole time. James tells us what starts here. What? Yep. Desire. Okay? Paul is reminding the Corinthians, and as he reminds them, he reminds us. The fight right here. This is where it's won, and this is where it's lost. Okay? Are we fighting the right fight? That's the question we need to ask ourselves today. So let's work our way through the context. The power of meekness, not force. You know, and this is what Paul says, you know, meek and gentle, and that's the side of me you want to see. You don't want to see the other side, you know. That's not how we usually approach conflict, though, is it? It's not. Especially, I think, for us guys, you know, it's about, you know, if somebody does us wrong, we often think that we have a right, don't we, to get them back. Well, they did this to me, therefore I have the right to get them back. Well, how many times do you think I have those conversations with my playground bullies? You know, daily. No, it's not that bad. It's really not. But that's often what happens. Well, they pushed me first. And guess what? Who's the one in my office? Yeah. Some of that reasoning that we make, even as adults, isn't much different than what it was when we were kids on the playground. Okay. So gentleness is not weakness, it's controlled strength. And we see this in the power of the apostle Paul here. Remember the Beatitudes? You know, this is one of those messages to the world, and the world hears it and says, "Are you kidding me? Strength and weakness, it goes against everything that the world teaches us." Uh-huh. Exactly. And that's what Paul's reminding us. But the Beatitudes in Matthew 5, blessed are the poor in spirit. Now I want to say, since we're talking a lot about the spirit, we're just talking about how you think about yourself. Okay, when you think of yourself more appropriately, like you should, as opposed to that Pharisee who said, "Oh Lord, I'm so glad you didn't make me like this lowly tax collector over here." You know, that's the kind of thing we're talking about. The Pharisee certainly wasn't poor in spirit, and he wasn't blessed because of that. On the other hand, the tax collector is, "God help me, I'm a sinner." See, that's being poor in spirit. That's being poor in spirit. Those that mourn, blessed are those that mourn, the meek, those who hunger and thirst, and we know that's for righteousness. The merciful, the pure in heart, the peacemakers, those who are persecuted, blessed, the world says. Persecuted, are you kidding me? When you're reviled, when they lie about you, you are blessed. That is so contradictory to worldly thinking. And Paul is reminding us where the real power is. It isn't what I can do as a man. It's about what God can do in me, a servant. A servant. Okay? What do we see in Christ's example on the cross? I'm going to talk about the power of meekness. I mean, I was reminded in one of the songs that we sang. What were the only words he spoke from the cross? Almost the only words. Well, Father, forgive him. Yeah, I didn't think of that one, but here's your mother. Take care of her. Had a conversation with somebody hanging near him. What was Jesus doing on the cross? Being compassionate, being kind. Dave reminded us recently, we sang a song, he could have called 10,000 angels. You know what? That would have been the worldly response. Quite honestly, that would have been a worldly response. Now, the option was there for him. He could have done it. But would that have fulfilled God's plan? So here he is. And quite honestly, I love to say this. I don't think it's accurate, but I'm going to say it anyways. You know, if Jesus would have lashed out, would we have blamed him? I mean, if anybody had the right to be a little upset, wasn't it Jesus on the cross? But that wasn't what he did. He ministered. In the midst of physically dying, he continued to minister. We just, 3 examples right there. The power of meekness, not force. Wow. The real enemy, Paul reminds the Corinthians and us, is not flesh and blood. Paul says something crucial. Though we walk in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh. The arguments, fears, insecurities, temptations, these are part of deeper spiritual struggles. If we misidentify the enemy, we will always fight the wrong battles. Now, these 2 next points, really resonate with me because, you can win an argument. And I've won some arguments in my life. Did you hear Kathy over there? Wasn't necessarily referring to arguments with her. I never win those arguments. I like to think I do sometimes, but I don't. But no, I've won some arguments. I can spin some words. I can do some wordsmithing. But I got to tell you, I've won a lot of arguments and afterwards still felt miserable. Still didn't feel like maybe I accomplished anything. And like it says up there, my peace was gone. It wasn't good. How does that happen? Well, Paul, I think, would say to us, as he would say to the Corinthians here, because you were fighting the wrong fight. Yeah, you won this fight that you picked, but it wasn't the right fight. So there's nothing good. There's nothing good to come out of it unless you're a narcissist. Then you'll be quite proud of the accomplishment. But thank goodness I'm not a narcissist. Okay? Oh, sure, we all have narcissistic tendencies from time to time. You can defeat a person and still be defeated spiritually. Again, if you're fighting the wrong fight, those are both true statements. The real war happening is in our mind and in our heart. Another way to say it, it's stinking thinking. It's unholy thinking. It's getting caught up in a line of reason and justification and defending yourself that is anything but of God. But because it exalts me, I feel good about it. What's the Bible say about those who exalt themselves? They will be humbled. Paul also shares that the weapons are different. The weapons are different. And here's maybe a pretty good indication of the spiritual nature of this particular text in 2 Corinthians 10. Paul continues, the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God. We don't fight with manipulation, pride, or self-reliance. Our weapons are spiritual. Truth instead of lies. Faith instead of fear. Prayer instead of panic. Obedience instead of control. These are not weak tools. They're mighty through God. And they have the power, as Paul explains, to tear down strongholds. And so what are those strongholds that we're talking about? Well, remember, keep this in the context of this passage. We're talking about, what are we thinking? What are we thinking? So what are those barriers that we need to overcome in those moments of temptation? What are those barriers that we need to overcome when those evil desires pop into our heads? You know, a stronghold is a pattern of thinking, things like, oh, I'll never change, you know. I mean, that's just giving up, isn't it? That's just giving up. Oh, I'll never change. Once a drunk, always a drunk. I'll never change. Again, that's just giving up. God doesn't care about me. We talked a little bit about this and about how Satan uses pain quite effectively to attack somebody's faith, to drive them away from God. And that's often, you know, obviously with all this going on in my life, how can there even be a God, let alone a God that cares about me? Look at how I'm suffering. Look at how I'm suffering. I tell you what, when Satan can get us in those mindsets, man, it's hard to recover. It can be hard to recover. And then another one up here, I got to handle this on my own. Gods of no value, gods of no help. And it's amazing how quickly people can draw those conclusions and come to these attitudes, these strongholds, as Paul explains them as. Paul says we are to cast down imaginations and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God. You know, Paul is really making the point here. It's the knowledge of God that's going to set us free, but it's also the knowledge of God that we need to protect, because that's what's being attacked. You know, it's going back, and you'll see the slide again today. You know, and it started in the garden. I mean, that spiritual battle started back in the garden when the serpent simply asked the question, did God actually say that? And the answer is yes, he did. We know he said it. But that question causes doubt. It chips away at the knowledge of God, at the truth of God. And when you lose the knowledge of God, when you lose the truth of God, when you trade the truth for a lie, your spiritual vision is gone. You become blind spiritually, and the ability to discern right from wrong, to be able to even have a chance at making the right decision, is gone. You are now a victim of spiritual warfare. And most of the time, when that happens, we don't even know it. It's so subtle. You see, because you know what, if Satan just walked in here right now and his big red tail and, his horns and, all these things that we imagine him at, if we saw that, it would be so obvious. And I bet every one of us would successfully avoid the serpent, right? But see, he's not stupid. Not at all. That's why he comes from the hidden places. His tactics are defined as ambushes. Okay? We never see it coming without discernment. And that's the question that really should be weighing heavy on your heart. How are you doing at discernment? How are you doing? Because that's the key over this. To first of all, having the vision to recognize, there he snuck up on me, but I got him. And now I can do something about it, okay? All right. Taking every thought captive. That means we don't just passively endure wrong thoughts, we confront them. You've heard me say this over the years, that at times I've just been amazed at how something so negative, so unholy, so wrong can be in my head. How many of you have had that experience? Okay, those of you who don't have your hands up, you're liars. Just gonna call it, you're lying. Because we've all had that. Where do you think those things come from? If we don't realize that that's a little planting, of something negative by someone unholy, we're really not paying attention to our study right now. And so because of that, we need to grab hold of that thought. We need to take it captive before it takes us captive. We need to take it captive before it makes us a victim, okay? So going on here, Paul's talking about pulling down those strongholds. When a thought contradicts God's truth, it's got to go. But here's the problem with that. How often do we actually stop and have that conversation in our head? How often do we actually stop and go, whoa, I gotta check this out. I gotta make sure it's okay. And then when we do that process, we're in a much better place to do the right thing, to either avoid it, change it, or just, whatever it is that we need to do to make sure we don't become that thought's victim. James 1:14-15 says, but each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. Then desire, when it has conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, brings forth death. That's why we're saying the battle's not out here, it's here. The symptoms are out here. The pain is out here. The damage is out here. But the battle is right here. Is right here. Another very popular passage that we need to bring here. Romans 12:2. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. When it says that, by the renewal of your mind, how you change this, how you overcome it, Another way to read this that fits this context is do not be conformed to the thinking of this world. The thinking of this world. Don't be thinking like this world. Because to say don't act like the world is too late. It's too late. You see, because the battle started way back here when I had this thought. And then I made a decision what to do with this thought. Action. So sometimes we fight the fight at the wrong point. We got to fight the fight here, not here, okay? Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed, changed. How do you change? How do you become more godlike? What's he saying here? Then you think more godlike by the renewal of your mind, that by the testing you may discern what the will of God is, what is good, acceptable, and perfect. That by the testing, by taking a moment and looking at the thought and being honest enough to say, this is unholy, and I cast it away. But too often we get the thought and we get wrapped up in it and we just go. We just go. And then we get in trouble. And Paul's reminding us in the Roman letter, James is reminding us in James, and his messages to the Corinthians, we got to fight the right fight. And the right fight is right here in our thinking. Taking every thought captive. Been pointing at this all morning. This is one of the most challenging commands, bringing every thought into captivity to the obedience of Christ. Not some thoughts, but every thought. I don't know about you, but I'm going to get a little busy this week in doing that, okay? But honestly, I think it's like anything else. Once you get into the habit of it, it happens naturally. And I think this is a challenge for us. Is this something that happens naturally for you? And one thing that I want to remind us too is that James reminds us to pray for wisdom. And he says the reason you don't have wisdom is because you don't ask. You don't ask. So ask for that wisdom, because that wisdom is so important. It's such a powerful tool in these moments of considering, in these moments when I take a thought captive. Is it right? Is it holy? Or is it unholy? Pray for that wisdom. We all need it, more of it. Our lives move in the direction of our strongest thought. I want you to think about that. Our lives move in the direction of our strongest thought. There's a lot of truth to that. So think about the things that you're thinking about right now, maybe. If your mind is unguarded, your life will be unstable. But if your mind is surrendered to Christ, your life becomes anchored. In other words, when we think Christ-like, hear this, if you're taking notes, this is worth writing down. If you think Christ-like, you will act Christ-like. So if you think Christ-like, taking those thoughts captive for Christ, then your life will be a life of obedience to Christ. Now, does that mean we don't mess up anymore? Of course not. Of course not. Taking every thought captive again, building on this. Ask yourself, does this thought align with God's truth? Does it lead me towards Christ or away from him? And if you're going to answer that first question about God's truth, you better know it. You better know it. That's why Bible study is part of that equation in developing spiritual vision. If it doesn't belong to Christ, if that thought doesn't belong to Christ, then it doesn't belong in our minds as well. I mean, that's simple enough, right? That's simple enough. Our character is more important to our impact on the world than our circumstances. Our character is more important to our impact on the world than our circumstances. We cannot always control or predict the latter, circumstances, things that happen in our lives. However, as the Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl wrote, in his book, in Search, in Man's Search for Meaning, excuse me. If you haven't read that book, I recommend it. Um, in fact, I need to buy another copy because I gave it away and somebody never brought it back. They obviously needed it more than me, and that's okay. I can buy it again. But it's one of those books that I've read that really made an impact on my life. And I'll have to be honest, the last time I read it was probably college, and so I need to read it again. But it's because of things like this. He says, everything can be taken from a, remember, this is a man who was in the Holocaust, okay? This is where that's coming from. He was there, okay? He was in a situation where he literally saw everything that can be taken from a person, taken from them. Everything. And in that, he says, but there's one thing they can't take. You can give it up. And he watched a lot of people give it up. Everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. Believe it, and it will change your life. Do you think maybe Job was an example of this? I mean, where did Job end up after every terrible thing that happened to him? And we're reminded, we talked about it in class and we sang the song. I mean, it was all taken from him, with the exception of his wife, right? Or did he lose her too? Maybe should have. I don't know. What was Job's relationship with God after it all? Was it good or not? Was it challenged? Was it tested? Absolutely was. Absolutely was. But Dr. Franco, Job from the Bible are examples that everything can be taken away from you except the decision you make about how you feel about it. And Job never stopped loving God through all his pain. Did he have moments? I'm sure he did. We talked a bit about that this morning. This famous psychiatrist, Dr. Frankl, added, and this is good here too. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. Are you seeing this? There is a space, and in that space is our power to choose our response. Our response lies in our growth and in our freedom. In other words, how we respond is going to affect how we grow and whether or not we're free. Even if we're bound by chains, we can still be free. That's what Victor believed. That's what he experienced in his life. Kathy reminded of this, I think, in our class this morning. I've said it multiple times. I don't have the passages to bring up here, but how many times have we talked about that principle that we're taught in scriptures to pause, to wait on God, to look for God. With every form of temptation that comes to you, God also provides a way of escape. How do we find that way of escape? Right here. This is what he's talking about, right here. In that moment right after temptation, in that moment right after being introduced to some horrible, unholy temptation, desire, whether you realize it's unholy or not in the moment. But there's that moment before I do. And it's in that moment, that's where the battle is fought and won. But you got to be aware of it. You got to be aware of it. You got to be looking for it. You got to plan for it. Otherwise, you just kind of get rolled over sometimes by the temptation. And you're tricked into believing that you don't have time to make up your own mind. You get caught up in it. But when we know that's where the battle is fought and won, we'll look for it. We'll prepare for it through praying for wisdom, through continued Bible study, and hope and trust in the Holy Spirit who promises to intervene in our times of weaknesses. Teaching us, literally, not teaching us, but literally praying for us. Taking care of us in ways that, quite honestly, I don't think we can fully comprehend. But where's your faith on that? Do you believe it? Do you believe it? It's biblical. Not sure why not. So this whole thing that Viktor Frankl was talking about here in the Bible is called discernment. Taking this thought, this desire, this temptation, and putting it alongside God's word. And realizing, nice try, Lucifer. I caught that one. Away from me. Resist the devil and he'll do what? Flee. Flee. You know what that is? Victory. It's victory. It's victory. It's using discernment. It's fighting the fight where the fight needs to be won, and it's victory. And guess what? Nothing ever got dirty. No hands got dirty. Because no action was taken. Because they fought the fight right here where it needed to be before it became doing something that was just going to get me in trouble. Paul says in the end of this too, look what's right before your eyes. Paul ends this section with a challenge. Do you look at things according to the outward appearance? And this was part of the judgment against him. Apparently, Paul wasn't impressive to look at, unlike your preacher. I probably shouldn't have done that. That was a bit haughty, wasn't it? See, there was that temptation, and I didn't think about it. I just went with it, and there you go. Perfect example. Lack of discernment. But literally, people were looking at Paul and said, he's not impressive. He's not impressive. Oh, sure, he writes some things that are kind of impressive, but in presence, got this goofy eye, you know. I mean, literally, this is what was going on. So Paul says, well, think about this. We do the same thing that these Corinthians were doing to Paul too often. We're deceived by what we see. We judge situations too quickly before we get all the information. We misunderstand people. Again, we're maybe not getting all the information that we need to get. We underestimate, what God is doing. Why are we more often than not responding from a negative assumption? I want you to hear that. I'm pretty good at this. Somebody asks a question, and right away I'm like, what are they doing? I've got this negative connotation going on, I'm struggling right now to find some good examples, but I need you to think about it yourself. Has somebody ever said something, whether it's from the pulpit or in a conversation or between you and your spouse, and they say something, and right away you just get mad about it, or you get angry, or you get miffed? You know what I mean? It's like, what? What stupid thing are you doing now? Kind of thing. Okay. And we do that a lot. We do that a lot with each other. We assume something negative. Well, Victor would say to us, why don't you flip that around and assume positive? And realize maybe you need some more information to understand. It's called a conversation. Ask questions, clarifying questions, detailed questions. Get more information. Quit assuming the worst. And that's exactly what they were doing to Paul. They were even going to the point where Paul's not even a Christian. He's not even a man of God. This is really, I think, the birthplace of many of the fights that we have with each other, where we assume negative things about each other that quite simply aren't true. And in so doing that, Satan is served well. So here we are, how we end each one of these lessons, reminding us that this spiritual battle has a long history, beginning in the book of Genesis. But I want you to be thinking about this and applying it in your own life. Are there some things that maybe you're holding on to that you shouldn't be? And maybe the question to ask in that discernment, even though the serpent meant it in a different way, but maybe it's a good question for us to ask ourselves. Did God actually say that? Now, like I said, Satan used that to create doubt and question, because when he said that, God did actually say that. But maybe the flip of that for us in the exercise of discernment, in the exercise of fighting the battle where the battle needs to be fought, we simply ask ourselves, did God actually say that? Is that God's will? Is that in God's Bible? And it's real easy to figure it out, isn't it? If you take the time to do it and fight the fight where the fight needs to be fought, right here. Is there a battle you're fighting today that we can help you with? Let us help. Won't you come? Well, together we stand and sing the song of encouragement.